Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 21. Sarah hesitantly knocked on the door to Tally's shared dorm room and briefly clenched her jaw, trying to hide how nervous she was currently feeling. She knew Tally wouldn't be in there. She had purposely planned to arrive at a time when she knew Tally would be out, wanting to be able to talk to Collar and the younger Bellwether without Tally being there to listen in. The door opened and Abigail's bored expression morphed into one of surprise, and she straightened. "General," she glanced into the room behind her. "I'm sorry, Tally isn't here, I know." Sarah interrupted her. Abigail's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. "I'm not here to see Tally. I'm here to speak to you and Collar." Abigail's eyebrows went higher. "Oh." She couldn't keep the curiosity out of her voice. "May I come in?" "Oh." Abigail's cheeks tinged darker with a blush, and she immediately stepped aside so that Sarah could walk into the room. "General." Rael's greeting was accented by the sound of her zipping up her jacket, standing awkwardly next to her desk. Sarah held back her laughter at the way the two cadets were behaving, clearly uncertain of how they were supposed to act around her. She decided to put them out of their misery. "You can both relax," she said simply, watching the way that both their shoulders dropped from standing at attention. "I'm not here on a military matter." Rael and Abigail glanced at each other. "This is more of a personal issue," Sarah admitted. She suddenly felt very awkward herself. "Is it about Tally?" Rael asked, frowning. "In a sense," Sarah said slowly. "I am simply—" She paused, pursing her lips and trying to think of how she wanted to word her question. "As much as I hate to admit it, I am afraid that I have no idea of what to get Tally for Christmas. No one knows her better than the two of you, and I was hoping that you would be able to help me." Abigail and Rael exchanged another look, clearly surprised, and Sarah felt her face heat up in mild embarrassment. "Yeah, of course," Rael stammered out. She looked back at Sarah. "We could definitely help you with that, General." Sarah nodded at Rael, grateful. "Thank you." She hesitated for only a split second before adding, "You may call me Sarah, by the way." The two cadets' eyes bulged, and she quickly held up a hand, needing to clarify, "Only in informal situations just as this one. After everything that has happened over the past couple of days, I don't think there is any reason to stick to formalities in personal situations." The two cadets both nodded quickly, still looking surprised, but Abigail spoke up before she could say anything else. "Is there a price range? For Tally's gift, I mean." Sarah blinked at the forward question, and Rael whipped her head back to look at Abigail. Her turn to be embarrassed. "Abs! What?" Abigail defended herself with a shrug of her shoulders. "It's a valid question." "Money is not an issue, Abigail." Sarah interrupted whatever Rael had been going to say with a forward tilt of her head. She had more money than she knew what to do with, and she would much rather spend it on Telly than on anything related to herself. In that case, Abigail said with a toothy grin, I know exactly what you should get her. Sarah's favorite time of day had always been the night time. Even before, when she had the biddies and had no need to sleep for more than an hour or so, she had always preferred the quiet stillness of the night over the busy chaos of the day. It always allowed her to have some quiet moments to herself, uninterrupted by the thoughts of the 7 other women she had been linked to, and safe from the intrusions of officers and politicians that needed to speak with her about one thing or another. She had, at first, been annoyed at the idea of having to sleep every night. It was something she viewed as a waste of time, something that had to be done when she could have been doing other, far more important things, useful things. That viewpoint had quickly changed, however, once she began sharing a bed with Telly Craven every night. Going to sleep pressed up against her, listening to the sound of her gentle and sometimes not so gentle snoring, and then getting to wake up every day to the sight of messy red hair and Telly's sleep-laden voice was something Sarah would never tire of, and something she hoped she would never have to live without. Even on nights when Sarah had too much work to do, too many reports to read or requests to approve, she had started bringing them to bed with her, so that way, whenever Telly went to bed and inevitably fell asleep first, Sarah was still there with her, not wanting to miss out on spending any time with Telly. It had been just over a week since Telly had been taken, and they had spent every night since then together. There was no need for Telly to not stay with her anymore, now that essentially everyone in Fort Salem was aware of their relationship. And frankly, Sarah was able to sleep easier, knowing that Telly was right next to her if something were to happen. Sarah's hand was absent-mindedly stroking up and down Telly's side. The younger woman was lying down next to her, curled up, as Sarah sat propped up against the headboard, reading the most recent report she had been given in the ongoing effort against the Camarilla. Even though her eyes were closed, she could tell that Telly wasn't asleep yet, her breathing not quite slow and heavy enough. So when Telly stretched out slightly and blinked sleepily up at Sarah, it didn't surprise her. What did surprise her was the question that came out of Telly's mouth. "What do you want for Christmas?" Sarah's hand stilled for a moment before resuming its movements, and she set the report down on her lap, looking down at Telly, who was looking up at her with her big brown eyes. "It has been a very long time since someone has asked me that question," she admitted. Telly's eyes widened, looking almost offended. "Have people not been getting you gifts for Christmas?" "No, they have," Sarah corrected her, almost wanting to laugh at how affronted Telly had sounded at the idea of her never getting anything for Christmas. "But for as long as I can remember, it has usually just been different kinds of ridiculously expensive alcohols." "Oh," Telly's face scrunched up in the way that Sarah found painfully adorable. "I don't think I can afford anything ridiculously expensive." Sarah smiled down at her. "You know, you don't have to get me anything at all, right? I don't expect you to." Telly looked almost offended again. "I know I don't have to, but I want to. I love you and I want to get you something that shows you that." Sarah couldn't help herself as she leaned down to press a kiss to Telly's lips once and then twice, smiling at Telly's words. "I love you too," she whispered against Telly's lips before pulling back. "If you want to get me something, you can. But it's okay if you don't." She turned to go back to her report, but Telly's voice interrupted her again. "So, what do you want?" Sarah stopped in the action of lifting the report back up to look at Tally, who was looking at her expectantly. "Will you let me think about it?" she asked. She knew Tally was expecting an answer, waiting for Sarah to give her something concrete to what seemed like a simple question. But Sarah hadn't thought about what she had wanted in centuries. The past 300 years of her life had been spent entirely on surviving on things that were needed and not desired. The only thing in life that Sarah was certain she wanted was a life with Tally Craven in it, and that was something that she already had. Tally grinned up at her. "Okay, that's fine." Sarah moved her hand that had been resting on Tally's side and reached up to tuck a few errant strands of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, darling." "Aren't you gonna ask me what I want for Christmas?" Tally teased, eyes sparkling mischievously. Sarah turned back to her report. "Oh, I already bought your gift." Tally sat straight up in bed. "You did?" Sarah just hummed in response. "What is it?" Sarah looked over at Tally with a look of fond exasperation. "It," she said, reaching out to boop Tally gently on the nose, "is a surprise." Tally stuck out her lower lip in a mock pout. "Can I get a hint?" Her brown eyes had been widened into, what had Anacostia called it? The puppy eyes. And Sarah had to chuckle to herself. "You know, I find it very difficult to deny you anything, my love. But I will have to deny you this. It's a secret." Tally wrinkled her nose in disappointment. "Okay, fine," she grumbled in concedence. She turned to go and lay back down, but then hesitated, looking at Sarah. "Are you gonna come to bed?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Is that not where I am?" "Well, yeah." Tally bit her lip. She was wearing one of Sarah's old t-shirts as pajamas, the collar slipping slightly off of one shoulder. "But I meant—" Her face turned red slightly. "I meant, like, are you gonna go to sleep soon?" "Do you want me to go to sleep soon?" "I want you to hold me," Tally clarified with a slightly deeper blush. "Oh." Sarah tilted her head, heart stuttering in her chest at Tally's words. Tally looked away, hands going down to mess with the hem of her borrowed shirt. "I know you probably have to finish working though, so it's okay." But Sarah was already putting the reports back into their folders, setting it on the nightstand next to her. She shifted so that she was on her side and found Tally looking at her with a mildly surprised look on her face. "The reports can wait," Sarah said simply, watching a smile crawl onto Tally's face. "Let's go to bed, darling." Tally's least favorite part of War College was the classes she had without her sisters. They were all off on their own tracks now, which meant they had separate schedules, and even though they still had a few classes and meal times together, she missed being able to spend all of her days with them. She was heading back to her dorm after her last class of the day when she spotted a familiar figure off in the distance, and she stopped to look up. The witch father was standing on the outskirts of the gardens, talking to Isadora. Tally watched curiously, wondering what business the witch father had on Fort Salem today, when a thought suddenly crossed her mind, and she stiffened. The witch father seemed to say goodbye to Isadora and leave, and Tally's legs started moving forward before she even realized what she was doing. "Excuse me, witch father," she called out, nervously, once she got closer. He turned around, raising his eyebrows when he saw Tally approaching him. "Cadet Craven?" Tally faltered. "You know who I am?" The witch father gave Tally a sympathetic smile. "I'm afraid, Cadet Craven, that after what has recently transpired, almost everyone around here knows who you are." "Oh." Tally felt her face heat up in embarrassment. "Right." Is there something I can do for you? The witch-father asked, thankfully changing the subject. Yes, actually there is, Telly said. The witch-father raised his eyebrows in curiosity, but he didn't say anything. Telly bit her lip nervously. Do you think you could teach me how to make a scourge? The end of the semester and the Christmas ball that followed came much faster than Telly had been expecting. Abigail had finally convinced Raelle and Scylla to stay for the ball, citing it as a final way to all spend time together before leaving for winter break for a month and a half. Raelle had relented at that, but was still planning on leaving the day after to go back to the session to see her father. Telly had also, to her surprise, convinced Sarah to come with her to the Bellwethers for dinner on Christmas Eve. Sarah had pushed back at first, saying that she didn't want to spend any more time with Petra than strictly necessary, especially not a Petra that was sharing a bed with one Nick de Batan. But Telly had flashed her those goddess-damned puppy eyes, saying that she wanted to spend Christmas with her family, which included Sarah, thank you very much, and Sarah found herself unable to continue to tell Telly no, even if she was dreading the whole affair. She just desperately hoped that Nicte wouldn't be there. The night of the ball eventually arrived, and the excitement in the air could be felt by everyone. Gregorio had been studiously avoiding Telly ever since the news of her relationship with Sarah became public news, something that Sarah found herself taking a petty delight in, and when Sarah and Telly entered the ballroom together, hand in hand, she definitely didn't have to hold back a laugh when she spotted him head back further into the room, away from them. She felt Telly squeeze her hand as they walked into the room, and she looked down, breath hitching in her throat, as she took in the sight of Telly in her dress again. The Christmas ball, like Beltane, was one of the few times that soldiers at Fort Salem could wear formal clothing that was not their dress blues, and when Sarah saw Telly in her dress for the first time, with its low neckline and her hair pulled back into a neat bun, she had barely been able to keep her hands to herself. Telly hadn't been able to at all. She had been expecting Sarah to wear a dress like she had at Beltane, and so, when she saw Sarah in a tailored dress shirt and pants with a matching vest and jacket, Telly's eyes had gone wide, and Sarah was certain that the redhead had stopped breathing for a moment. Telly had then grabbed her by the belt buckle and pulled her close, and it was all over from there. They ended up being a little late to the ball. They had to redo their hair afterwards, and Sarah had to fix the rip up the side of Telly's dress that she had made in an attempt to get it off of her faster. I'm going to go say hi to Abigail real quick. I'll be right back. Telly squeezed Sarah's hand once again, before letting go and making her way through the crowd of people toward her sister. Abigail, Adele, and Scylla were all sitting at one of the tables on the outer edge of the room. Adele and Scylla in a conversation, as Abigail stared into the center of the room with a confused expression on her face. Telly pulled out a chair and sat down next to Scylla, glancing around the table. Where's Ray? Scylla turned from Adele to look at Telly. You clean up nice, Telly. She flashed her a grin. Raelle will be here soon. She just put off packing till the last minute, and our flight leaves super early in the morning. You didn't want to help her pack? Apparently, I'm too much of a distraction. Scylla winked at Telly. Telly laughed lightly at that, eyes going out into the room where she found Sarah talking to Anacostia. I know what that's like. Scylla swiveled in her chair to follow Telly's gaze, and she grinned again. Alder looks good. She turned back to Telly. Is that why you were late? Telly flushed in response, and Scylla laughed loudly. Ha! I knew it! Telly chose to ignore Scylla, and finally looked over at Abigail, who was still staring out into the room with a frown on her face. What's with her? Abigail's head whipped to stare at Telly. My mom is dancing, she said accusatorily. Telly frowned back at her. So? So? Abigail stressed. My mom doesn't dance. Tally leaned in over the table slightly, head craning to find Petra on the dance floor where she was. Oh. Tally understood why Abigail was acting the way that she was. Petra was dancing. Slow dancing, with a smile on her face. Her partner, the soldier that Nikta had taken to disguising herself as. Tally suddenly remembered the hickey that had been on Nikta's neck 2 weeks earlier, and she felt herself blush again. She needed to get out of here before Abigail started asking too many questions. She mumbled out something about wanting a drink and tore away from the table. Abigail didn't even seem to notice that she left, going back to staring at the 2 women who were on the dance floor together. Tally crossed the room to the table lined with drinks and food and grabbed the nearest drink, taking a large gulp. Her eyes darted from Petra and Nikta on the dance floor back to Abigail, who looked equal parts confused and horrified. Tally shuddered, taking another large gulp, not even sure what kind of alcohol she was consuming. She felt a gentle hand on the small of her back, and she turned to find Sarah looking at her with a mildly concerned look on her face. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked, quizzically, eyes looking Tally up and down. "Abigail has spotted Nikta and her mom dancing together," Tally whispered, leaning in so only Sarah would hear her. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, and she tossed a glance in Abigail's direction. "You mean she hasn't figured it out yet?" Tally shook her head. "Not yet, but they aren't exactly being subtle right now." Sarah looked away from Abigail to the 2 women she was staring at, and then suddenly looked back to Abigail with a light scoff. "Surely she can't be that dense. I've never seen her mother dance at a single one of these events before." "Yeah, but it's not like she would have any reason to believe that they're together just because of a dance, right?" Sarah and Tally watched as Petra seemed to laugh at something that Nikta said to her, the smile on Nikta's stolen face, one of utter adoration. Sarah grimaced at the sight, reaching down to take Tally's drink from her and down it in one go. "She's going to figure it out by the end of the night, I guarantee you." She set the empty glass back down onto the table and looked down at Tally, smiling. "Do you want to dance, my love?" A smile lit up Tally's face as she turned away from Petra and Nikta to look at Sarah. "Yes, of course." Her expression shifted into a nervous one. "I don't know how to, though. Not properly." "That's all right," Sarah said softly, taking Tally by the hand and leading her out onto the dance floor. "I will teach you." If Sarah wasn't fond of the idea of Petra and Nikta being together, which Tally knew for a fact that she wasn't, she seemed to find it altogether hilarious that Abigail was utterly clueless on the matter. Every time her gaze landed on the younger bellwether, she would have to hold back laughter at the look of confusion written all over her face, combined with the fact that she couldn't seem to tear her gaze away from wherever her mother and Nikta were. "I cannot believe it's taking her this long," Sarah murmured into Tally's ear. Tally glanced back at Abigail and had to hold back laughter of her own. "Maybe she just doesn't want to believe it." Sarah rolled her eyes. "I can't say I entirely blame her." Across the room, Abigail's eyes suddenly widened and her hand shot out to grab at Adil, who was sitting in the chair next to her, talking to Scylla. He immediately turned to Abigail, concerned, and this time Sarah couldn't hold back her laughter at the frantic look on Abigail's face. "I think she just figured it out." Tally turned slightly in Sarah's arms to find Abigail staring at her, frantically waving her over. "And I think that's my cue." She turned back to Sarah with a smile. "I'll be right back." Sarah bit back another laugh, and Tally stepped away, zigzagging her way through the people scattered around the room. The moment she got close to the table, Abigail grabbed her arm in a vice grip and dragged her into the chair next to her. My mom is dancing with Nicta, Abigail hissed. Yes, I can see that, Telly said. Did you not know it was her? Of course I did. Abigail shot a wild-eyed glance back at her mom before turning back to Telly. But I think there's something going on between them. Just look at them. She grabbed Telly's face and forced her head to the side, the two of them turning to look at Petra and Nicta just in time to see Petra duck her head down to whisper in Nicta's ear, hand curling around the small of her back. See? Abigail swiveled Telly's head so that they were looking back at each other again. No way my mom would do that with someone she didn't like. Isn't your mom married? Scylla's voice sounded from the other side of the table. Abigail rolled her eyes. Yeah, but she has 3 husbands. They aren't exactly monogamous, and none of them married for love. They're allowed to date other people. 2 of my dads have mistresses. And now your mom does as well, Scylla teased. A full body shudder went through Abigail, and she physically recoiled, letting go of Telly's face. Okay, can we not call Nicta my mom's mistress? That makes it sound like they're sleeping together. Telly suddenly choked on air, coughing violently, her face instantly turning scarlet. Abigail stiffened. What was that for? Nothing, Telly choked out, shaking her head. It was nothing. No, Abigail said, staring at Telly. Why did you react like that when I mentioned them sleeping together? Telly shook her head. I didn't react like anything. Her voice was too high, and she knew that Abigail knew she was hiding something. Telly? I kinda, maybe, saw Nicta leaving your mom's bedroom the other week, Telly mumbled, quickly under her breath. Abigail froze in her seat, staring at Telly with eyes so wide that Telly was afraid they were going to pop out of her head. Abs? Telly prompted nervously. Okay, Abigail breathed. New rule. We're not gonna talk about it. But not talking about it, Abigail said shrilly, grabbing her drink from the table and chugging the rest of it. I'm gonna go get some more drinks, Scylla smirked. I think we're gonna need them. Scylla disappeared into the crowd of people and was immediately replaced by Riel, hair out of its usual braids and dressed in an all-white suit. Hey guys, I finally made it. She slid into the seat that Scylla had just vacated and turned to Abigail. Hey Abs, isn't that Nicta your mom is dancing with? Abigail shuddered again, this time reaching out for Adil's untouched drink and downing it. Riel glanced around the table confused. What did I say? Adil leaned over to Riel. We're not supposed to talk about it, he stage whispered. Abigail slammed the now empty glass down onto the table. Why do the most important people in my life continue to pick the most outrageous people to date? Riel's eyes flew open. Your mom is dating Nicta? Abigail ignored her question, jabbing a finger in Riel's direction. Former spree member. She turned to point at Telly, causing her eyes to go wide. 300-year-old former commander of the armed forces. Her body shifted so that she was pointing out onto the dance floor in the general direction of her mom. Founder of the spree. Riel looked equal parts amused and concerned. Maybe we should go back to not talking about it. Abigail groaned, dropping her head into her hands. Oh, I don't ever want to think about it. Adil looked like he was fighting back a smile as he placed a comforting hand onto Abigail's back. Do you want to go dance? Take your mind off of it. And get closer to them? Abigail lifted her head from her hands. No, thank you. I want to get out of here. Riel frowned at that. Wait, if you're leaving, then I don't need to stay, right? Syl and I can go? Abigail stood from her chair, grabbing Adil's hand and pulling him up with her. You can do whatever the hell you want to do, shitbird. I just need to forget that I ever learned that my mom is sleeping with Nicta. Your mom is sleeping with Nikta? Riel's eyes bulged. What part of not talking about it do you not understand? Abigail hissed. The part where you keep talking about it, Riel snapped back. Another shudder ripped through Abigail's body, and she turned to Adil. We're leaving. Riel rolled her eyes as Abigail all but dragged Adil out of the room, and she turned to Telly. Will you care if Scylla and I leave? Neither of us exactly want to be here, but we'll stay if you want us to. Telly shifted slightly in her chair to look back at Sarah, stunning in her suit, casually sipping a glass of whiskey and laughing at something that Isadora said to her. You can go, she said, noting the way Riel's shoulders seemed to sag slightly in relief as she turned back to face her. Sarah's with me. That's all I need.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.